he got interested, and then he fought for me to do it. The studio tried everything to keep me out of the film, and finally it settled with Paul and I meeting. So we met in his apartment in New York, and this has a lot to do with Paul as a person and why he and I had a lasting friendship.
At 89, Robert Redford is finally talking about Paul Newman in a way he never has before. And it's not about movies, fame, or awards. It's about the weird, messy, unforgettable friendship that lasted decades, full of bike crashes, pranks that could have ended in disaster, and moments that were quietly life-changing. For years they were Hollywood legends side by side, but off-screen, everything was different. The jokes, the rituals, the unspoken rules that held them together. Redford shares what he truly learned from Newman, what it meant to be trusted, challenged, and even envied by your best friend, and how those lessons still shape him today. And maybe, just maybe, it's the kind of bond you won't believe existed.
There was a time a while back when I was trying to get an apartment in New York, and for those of you who've been through this, you know it's kind of rough when you have to go before a board. And it was a really strict board, and I really needed to impress them with credentials, so I wrote to a few friends that they would support me and give me references. And I'd like to share with you tonight the letter that Paul wrote the board. To whom it may concern, Mr. Robert Redford has owed me $120 for over 3 years. He will not assume his obligation under threat of loss of friendship, honor, loyalty. I cannot, in good conscience.
Robert Redford wasn't supposed to be there.
Hell, it's just a bank like any other bank. Gotta move in slowly, check out everything. The thing to remember when
Don't tell me how to rob a bank. I know how to rob a bank.
Boy, a few dark clouds appear on your horizon, you just go all to pieces.
In the late 1960s, Hollywood had him pegged as a decent-looking California actor with some stage work and a couple of credits in films like Inside Daisy Clover and Barefoot in the Park. He'd done well enough, but nobody at a studio was betting their biggest project of the year on him. Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid was exactly that. The script was already famous in town. William Goldman's clever, funny take on outlaw legends had been the subject of a bidding war, and everyone at 20th Century Fox was demanding the safest, biggest stars they could land. Redford, at that point, was not on that list. The funny part is, Paul Newman didn't care about that list. Newman had been cast as Butch Cassidy first, and by then, he was already Paul Newman, Oscar-nominated, box office gold, and the proud owner of those blue eyes that made studio executives do whatever he wanted. He was given the chance to pick his partner for the Sundance Kid. The names were ridiculous: Steve McQueen, Warren Beatty, Marlon Brando, even Jack Lemmon for a brief second. McQueen came the closest. He read Goldman's script, liked it, and almost signed, but then got into a showdown over who would get top billing. McQueen wasn't about to take second place, and Newman wasn't going to budge either. That's when George Roy Hill, who had just directed Redford in Barefoot in the Park, put Redford's name forward. Fox hated it. Richard Zanuck and the executives wanted someone who would guarantee ticket sales, and to them, Redford was just another good-looking blonde with no proven audience. That's when Newman made the gamble. He and Hill had watched Redford in Barefoot in the Park, even stopped the reel to look closely at him, and Newman said flatly, "That's my guy." The studio balked, and Newman, who really could have had his pick of anyone in Hollywood, told them if they didn't hire Redford, he'd walk. Not just complain, not just sulk, but actually walk off the project. That changed everything. In one stroke, Newman handed Redford the biggest break of his career. The studio folded, knowing that without Newman, the whole project fell apart. The way Redford tells it, he was at home wrestling with a leaky faucet when the call came through. He was so convinced it was a practical joke that he hung up twice. The third time, it wasn't a secretary or an assistant on the line. It was Newman himself, chuckling on the other end. Newman told him, "Buy a better faucet, kid. You're about to afford it." That moment became the cornerstone of their friendship. Newman didn't have to stick his neck out, but he did. And for Redford, who was still trying to make his way, it meant more than just a job. It was proof that somebody at the top of the mountain believed in him. It all set the stage for one of the most legendary partnerships in film history, but the truth is, the real bond wasn't formed under the lights and cameras.
Buenos días, señores. ¿Les puedo servir en algo? Ordenen para atenderlos, por favor, de inmediatamente. ¿Quieren hacer algún depósito? Si quieren abrir alguna cuenta, vean al cajero para que los atienda inmediatamente. Los atendemos, por favor.
When people talk about movie chemistry, they usually imagine it happening on camera with the lights blazing. But with Newman and Redford, the real connection started in the downtime, when there weren't any cameras or reporters around. The production for Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid was shot in some breathtaking spots in Utah: Zion, Snow Canyon, little desert towns that barely had diners. And the two of them had a lot of quiet hours to kill between setups. One of the early evenings, they found themselves in this old rodeo ring. No crew hanging around, no assistants, just a couple of folding chairs, a six-pack of beer, and a wide-open desert sky. Newman, who was already in his mid-40s and carried that veteran confidence, cracked a beer, handed one to Redford, and said something along the lines of, "Let's figure out how to rob a train without looking like we're acting." That was the icebreaker. From then on, they slipped into this easy rhythm. For weeks, they'd run through lines together, improvise little bits, then jump on horses and race them just to burn energy. In the evenings, they'd swap stories. Redford about auditions that went nowhere, Newman about the chaos of live television back in the 50s, where everything that could go wrong usually did. What surprised Redford most was how different Newman was from his screen persona. On film, Newman looked unflappable, the guy with the perfect timing and endless cool, but off-screen, he was restless, chatty, always chewing a nail down to nothing, and chain-smoking like it was a competition. He loved rehearsing, tinkering with the smallest details, and he had this goofy sense of humor where he'd laugh the hardest at his own bad jokes. Redford was quieter, more watchful, but Newman dragged him into that looseness, and pretty soon they were feeding off each other. Some of their quirks even slipped into the film. Redford had this habit of nervously tapping his holster before certain lines, which Newman noticed one day, and told him to keep because it looked like something Sundance would naturally do. And Newman had his own strange ritual, rinsing his eyes with bottled water before takes, claiming it kept the twinkle on schedule. To outsiders, it looked like buddy chemistry. To them, it was just another Tuesday on set. Two guys figuring out how to make a script feel alive. By the end of filming, everyone could see there was something different about the way these two clicked, but the thing that really sealed their friendship wasn't the craft. It was the nonsense that came after, the prank war that would carry on for decades. The funny thing about Newman and Redford is that, for all the respect they had for the work, a lot of their friendship was really built on goofing around and trying to one-up each other. Take the bike story from the Butch Cassidy shoot. You know that raindrops keep falling on my head scene, where Newman hops on a bike and messes around? Well, off camera, he decided to turn that into a full-on dare. He looked at Redford one afternoon and bet him a case of his homemade lemonade. Newman actually bottled the stuff himself at home. that he could beat him racing down this steep Colorado fire road using the leftover prop bikes. Now, Newman had always been a speed junkie. Cars, boats, anything with wheels. If it went fast, he wanted in. But this trail was rough and rocky, and about halfway down he lost control, clipped the pedal, and went flying straight into a gully. He popped back up with a cracked rib, dirt everywhere, and a completely shattered Rolex his wife, Joanne, had given him. That watch was worth tens of thousands of dollars, but instead of cursing, he just glanced at it and joked, "Well, I guess I'm finally on time." And then, classic Newman, he finished the day's shoot like nothing happened. Redford never forgot it. Every 4th of July for more than 20 years, he sent Newman a case of lemonade as payment for that bet, a little private tradition between them. And that was only the start. For Newman's 50th birthday, Redford had a wrecked Porsche wrapped like a gift and delivered to his house. Newman countered by crushing it into a cube and sneaking it into Redford's living room, denting the floorboards. Redford eventually turned that hunk of metal into a sculpture and had it installed in Newman's garden. Neither of them ever said a word about it. The pranks just kept going, a silent language only the two of them spoke.
What are you barking at?
Quiet down, dog. Hey, Redford. I am painfully punctual. One of the things I might add that separate me and Redford.
Newman?
Where the hell?
People sometimes assume that because Robert Redford and Paul Newman looked so natural side by side on screen, they must have been joined at the hip off screen too. But that really wasn't the case. Their lives away from the cameras couldn't have been more different. Redford was the type who craved space and quiet, so as soon as he could, he built himself a home up in the Utah mountains, far away from the noise of Hollywood. That retreat eventually grew into the Sundance Institute, where he started giving young filmmakers opportunities they never would have had otherwise. He liked being close to the land, skiing in the winter, and spending time with his family away from the glare of the industry. Newman, on the other hand, was very much rooted in the East Coast. He stayed in Westport, Connecticut, with his wife, Joanne Woodward, and their kids. And his downtime wasn't spent chasing solitude, but chasing speed. He became absolutely obsessed with auto racing, not just the occasional Sunday drive either. He trained hard, competed in real races, and eventually won national championships in the Sports Car Club of America. By the late 1970s, racing was as much a part of his identity as acting. Because of that, months, sometimes even over a year, could pass without the two speaking. But the funny thing is, it never really mattered. Their friendship didn't need constant check-ins to survive. When they did reconnect, it wasn't the usual "how's the weather" type of chat. One of them would cut straight to the point with something like, "So, what's bothering you right now?" It might be nerves about a role, family worries, or just the pressure of living up to expectations. Whatever it was, the other guy would listen and carry it without judgment. That was their rhythm. Few words, but a lot of weight behind them. And even though they didn't see each other every day, their bond was solid, and the next time they'd team up, it would prove just how powerful that unspoken trust really was. So, when the Sting swept up 7 Academy Awards in 1974, it was impossible to ignore that Paul Newman and Robert Redford had officially become the most reliable box office duo in Hollywood, at least in that era. Reporters immediately started pestering them about what was next. Would they just keep teaming up over and over? Newman, with his trademark grin and quick wit, famously said, "Only if we can play the same guys with different hats." And it perfectly captured their mindset. They didn't want to be trapped repeating the same formula. And honestly, they didn't. Hollywood kept offering scripts that tried to bottle the magic, but the two of them trashed every bland or lazy repair idea that came their way, refusing to become caricatures of themselves. Instead, they turned their attention elsewhere. Newman threw himself into his food brand, Newman's Own, starting in 1982 with a simple salad dressing and a promise to donate all profits to charity. Over the decades, it's given away more than $600 million, funding projects like the Hole in the Wall Gang Camp for seriously ill kids, a name and inspiration pulled straight from their first film together. Redford, on his side, was building the Sundance Institute, investing money, energy, and time to create a haven for independent filmmakers who might otherwise never get noticed. They never had to coordinate it or boast about it. The projects became intertwined almost invisibly. Redford liked to call it invisible dominoes, a chain reaction of giving back, while Newman joked it was robbing the rich to entertain the poor. What's fascinating is that this parallel approach to philanthropy mirrored the trust and mutual respect they had on set, supporting each other quietly, without needing constant recognition, and quietly building legacies that would outlast any single movie. But even as they celebrated each other's successes, there were still subtle layers of human friction and unspoken feelings beneath the surface. Newman, fiercely private and precise about his image, carried his own complicated mix of pride and envy, not of Redford's achievements, but of his effortless ease. How did this tension shape their friendship? And did it ever spill into the work that made them legends? One thing that surprised Redford later in life was learning that Paul Newman, despite being fiercely private and famously self-contained, had snuck into a screening of Ordinary People, Redford's first film as a director back in the 1980s. Newman didn't just sit quietly in the back row. Friends say he was so moved he was seen wiping away tears in the hallway afterward, which, knowing Paul, was as rare and unguarded a moment as you could get. A few days later, Redford got a telegram with just 2 words. Proud. Told you it was classic Newman. Concise but packed with meaning. On the surface, it was just pride, but underneath it was a hint of what you might call friendly tension, or maybe honest human friction. In his posthumous memoir, Newman confessed to a subtle kind of professional jealousy, not of Redford's success exactly, but of his ease. People who knew him say Paul would glance at magazine covers featuring Redford and mutter, "He doesn't even try." Newman had always been the type who worked tirelessly to get acclaim, while Redford seemed to just walk into a room, smile, and have people instantly notice him. It wasn't rivalry in a bitter sense. It was just the honesty of a man who held himself to impossibly high standards, even as the world called him a legend. On top of that, Newman was known for his punctuality, and Redford's chronic lateness drove him crazy on set, which just added another layer to their very different work rhythms. When Redford finally learned about this mix of pride and envy, he laughed it off, saying something like, "Paul was James Dean with punchlines. I was just the guy who forgot to comb his hair." Fast forward to fall 2008. Newman was battling lung cancer at home in Connecticut and had stopped treatment. Redford visited him a few months before the end, and instead of talking about the illness, they chatted about politics, film, and the state of the world, just like old times. A little later, an envelope arrived for Redford marked, "Open after first snowfall." He waited, perched on the porch of his Utah home as the winter snow fell, and finally opened it. Inside was a single sheet of Newman's personal letterhead with just a few words. "The friendship was the part I got right. Everything else was just racing." P. Redford keeps that note folded in his wallet, and when he recounted it in an interview years later, he barely cracked a smile, his voice catching only once.
Tried everything to keep me out of the film. They felt there was an age difference of about 13, 14 years. He backs me up.
Ask Redford, now 89, what he misses most about Newman, and he doesn't even pause. It's not the fame, the awards, or the films they made together. It's the little things. The way Newman would laugh at his own jokes before even getting to the punchline. That mix of mischief and charm that made every set feel alive. Redford still keeps Newman's shattered Rolex tucked away in a drawer, the hands frozen at 10:42, marking the exact minute of that ridiculous bike crash during Butch Cassidy filming, a story they laughed about for decades. For Redford, the real legacy wasn't just the movies, they were the standards Newman set. "We argued over politics, cars, camera lenses," he once explained, "but we never ever disrespected each other in front of a crew. That's the deal. That sense of loyalty and respect, the idea of putting craft and friendship above everything else, became the blueprint for Redford's own career and life. Even years later, he honors it in small ways. Every 4th of July, he cracks open the first bottle of Newman's own lemonade, raises it toward the Utah mountains, and whispers, "Still on time, partner." He's not just remembering a friend. He's remembering the lessons, the laughter, and the quiet ways Newman shaped him. As he said after Paul's passing, "I have lost a real friend. My life, and this country, is better for his being in it." It's a reminder that some friendships leave marks far bigger than any movie or award ever could. If these details flip the story you thought you knew about Paul Newman and Robert Redford, smash that like icon and subscribe to enjoy more stories like this. Because the algorithm thinks Hollywood friendships are just gossip. Let's prove it wrong.